Good morning, everybody, and thanks again for joining us on What's Growing On. I am your co-host, Dorothy Dorton, with our other co-host, Terrence with Victory Teaching Farm. And good morning, Terrence. Thanks for being here, as always. We appreciate it.
Good morning. Thanks for having me, as always.
Awesome. Absolutely. We couldn't do it without you. So I am going to pop up Terrence's email address for us real quick, if I can find it. There it is. And so again, please don't hesitate to ask your questions in the comments. And email Terrence if you have questions about gardening, home gardening, or anything like that. Share your tips. If you've got some great, organic home gardening tips, we'd love to hear those in the comments as well. And of course, as always, I will put the slides you see in the Facebook comments after we do our broadcast. And you can always go back and watch this on Facebook or YouTube at AARP Alabama's sites. And so let's get started. We are going to be talking about just good old tips from seed to plate. So Terrence, I think we're going to start obviously talking about seeds. So can you tell us about some good old tips for our seeds?
Yes, absolutely. So the first thing you want to do is make sure you choose high quality seeds that have not expired. And while seeds that are a couple of years old will still potentially germinate and you'll have no problems, the germination percentage does reduce over the years as the seeds get older, also depending on how they've been stored. So a lot of times, seeds may be on a clearance rack or something like that. I would always suggest that you look for high quality seeds that have not expired. That's going to give you your best opportunity for, almost full germination of all your seeds and a good healthy seed. My preference is always heirloom and organic, but heirloom organic. Organic for obvious reasons. They've not been treated with pesticides and things like that. Heirloom, one of the benefits of heirloom is being able to save your seeds. And so a lot of times with hybrids, they've been developed in a way that even though they'll go to seed, you won't have as much success at all with those seeds that you save. So heirloom's always a good route to take. Once you get your seeds, or if you're already somebody who's storing your seeds, you always want to keep them either stored in your original packets until you get ready to use them. They always needed to be in a nice, cool, dry place. And then airtight containers. So if you're someone who's saving seeds, even if you're saving some of the seeds out of maybe a packet that you've purchased and you thought, well, maybe I can save these, and they'll still be good pretty much within the year, you want to save them in an airtight container. A glass mason jar is the perfect place to put these because it does become airtight. And in a cool place. You can actually store your seeds in the refrigerator. You can store them in your freezer. You just want to make sure that the seeds are completely dry and that there's no potential moisture in whatever container you've decided to store them in, or even just in a room in your house that maybe it's a good place to store things. If you've got a pantry or something like that, that's also a good place to put your seeds. But doing these things will ensure that you've got a healthy seed and that you have got a high germination rate, because that's the last thing we want to do is plant seeds that never come up.
Exactly. So, and this is, I had this experience. I went to, last year, I was, in the beginning of the pandemic, which has been almost a whole year. Can y'all believe it? I was trying in desperation to find something to do with my kiddos. And so I thought, okay, well, let's plant some stuff, and I went to a dollar store and found some old, some seed packets. And they were older because they were at the dollar store, and they about half of what I got maybe a little less than half germinated. And when I was like, I wonder what's wrong, I looked at the packets and it was like, oh, these were expired like a year ago. So no wonder they were very, very cheap. And I think they were like 4 for $1. So, but speaking of packets, you've got a great little diagram here to talk about seed packets and all the important information that's on the back of these.
Right. So a lot of times people are scared of seeds because they really don't know. It's not as easy as just taking a plant, digging a hole and putting it in the ground or in your pot. And so I think that sometimes deters people from starting their own seedlings, which, let me just say, the most economic way to grow your garden is to grow from seeds, because you can get a packet of 25, 30 seeds, and that if they've got that almost 100% germination rate, you could have 20, 25 plants out of one $2 seed packet, as opposed to buying an already grown transplant for you that costs you more than a package of 25 seeds. So I always encourage people to look into growing from your own seeds. And so all of the seed packets on the back have, and it varies. Some have a little bit different information. Some of them are laid out differently. It depends on the brand. But typically, they all have the same information on the back of the seed. And that is your guide to how to correctly plant these seeds. And so this one's great. It's kind of labeled for us. So we're going to start with A up at the very top. Okay, so this is going to give you the name of your seed, what it is you're planting. A lot of times they'll include the scientific name of the particular plant that you're planting, but that'll give you the name of what it is that you're growing. We're going to jump down to the bottom of this seed packet. And so at letter B, so this is your planting zone. This is kind of telling you when is the ideal time for you to plant this seed based on your region. So basically, you're just going to find where you are on this map and look at the little diagram at the bottom, and it'll kind of give you that window of when it's best to put your seeds in the ground, or go ahead and start your seeds and get them ready, for planting. And it usually gives you, a couple of months range there. So if you're starting from seed, you've got time to start and plant. So then we're going to move to C. And so this just kind of tells you, and one good thing, I know, Candy, I agree with you. We need a magnifier to read most seed packets.
And I will say, when I was trying to create this slide, the bigger I made it, the blurrier it got. So I tried to find a happy medium between size and blurriness. So.
Right. No, but I agree with Candy. Like this one, I'm leaning in to read, but I agree with Candy. It is very small print on the back of your seed packet. So grabbing your readers or a magnifier might help if you really want to look at the information, or if you're depending on this information to successfully get your seeds started. So thanks for mentioning that, Candy. But so back on here on C. So this is just always telling you, in average soil, after danger of your spring frost, which is, where we are right now. It kind of tells you when to sow them indoors if you're starting your own seeds inside, or if you're going to direct plant them outside. And so that just kind of gives you just an idea of when the best time is to plant it, kind of coupling in with B. So then at the top, we've got, D, E, F. So days to germinate. So that is the point in which, once you put your seed into the dirt, how long on average it's going to take for it to come up. And so there's a lot of variables with that. It also tells you the depth to sow, basically how deep you're going to stick that seed down into your soil. And we've got seed spacing. If you're planting directly in your garden, this is how far apart you want to plant these seedlings. So when they come up, they've got enough space to grow and thrive. You've also got So D, E, F, G. G is your row spacing. So if you're planting in rows in your garden, this is kind of saying how far apart your rows need to be. E, F, G, H. Okay, we're jumping around the alphabet here. So back down to the bottom with H. So when your seedlings get tall enough, especially if you're planting multiples in a pot, because you want to make sure out of your seedlings you do get, if you're worried about germination, you want to make sure you do get at least one plant. So you may be planting, several seeds in a pot or several seeds in a hole in your garden. In order to avoid overcrowding, once they get about 2 to 3 inches in height, you can actually space them, and you can just kind of pull the ones out. And I would always go for, the runts of the group. You want to leave the ones that look the most sturdy, that are the tallest, the greenest. But you can always thin those out, and it kind of gives you some guidance for that. And then one other thing, because I know we get, and this is to me one of the most important, is days to harvest. So from the point of putting the seed in the ground, when am I going to get my tomatoes? When am I going to get my peppers? This gives you kind of that average time frame of how long it's going to take for it to become, from seed to harvest and plate ready.
Awesome. And Anne Hales says, I have my seed packets out and I'm ready to get started. And go for it, Anne. You can get started right now. So this is great information. I love that seed packets do have all of this. It's kind of a cheat sheet for you for your specific seeds. And this is definitely something that I need in order to even think about planting seeds. So next we have a couple of slides talking about some tips and troubleshooting for the seeds that you've planted. So first of all, we want to talk about drying seeds out.
Right. So one of the most important things, and this is where that kind of germination process comes into place, and wondering, why your seeds haven't sprouted yet. One reason could be that you just didn't have good seeds, but most often it's because we let our seedlings, our pots that our seedlings are in, or even in our gardens, dry out. And so if your seedlings, the seeds need to be moist in order to sprout, which kind of makes sense. So I've got two graphics here. On one side is if your soil looks like that, and it's not a deep, rich, dark, blackish soil. If it looks like that, if it's you can kind of tell in one, it almost looks like it's moving away from the sides of the container, like maybe the soil is shrinking. Mm-hmm. That your soil is too dry. Your seeds are never going to sprout. So the graphic with the big green check mark is what you want your soil to look like. And sometimes when you're watering, your soil might look like that on top, especially if you're not watering enough. So a good rule of thumb or finger is to stick your finger down just a couple of inches. I mean, you don't want to stick it where your seeds are planted, and you should be planting your seeds somewhere right in the center, just so they kind of have room for the roots to grow. Just stick your finger down into the side, just maybe right past your fingernail. And that'll give you an idea if your soil is just moist on top but dry all the way down. You want to make sure when you stick your finger down in there that, you've got moist soil down through. Now, we don't want to flood them. You don't want water standing. You should have good drainage with your pot so the water can drain out. But so you don't want to drown them, but you always, if it looks like that picture with the green check mark, you should be doing well. And because overwatering can also lead to seed rot, which also will, prevent you from getting that little transplant to put in your garden.
Right. So it's almost the opposite of when you're testing to see if you're baking a cake. For a cake, you want the center to not have any moisture or anything really in it, right, or stick to the toothpick. But with this, you do want that moisture and have a little, make sure that it's down deep in there. So
yeah, that's a good comparison, Dorothy. And actually, you probably could use a toothpick for that. If you stick the toothpick down and it just comes with, but if you stick it
Right.
down in there and you pull it back up and it's got, dirt and stuff on it. I mean, so yeah, that's for all of our bakers out there, you know exactly what we mean by that with, toothpick tests. So that
Absolutely
works for testing if your soil's moist enough for your seedlings.
awesome. So we know that they like to be wet, not too wet, but just right. And then we also know that they like sunny spots.
Yes. So especially if you are starting your seedlings indoors, you want them to be in a nice, warm, sunny spot, because soil temperature, depending on the seed, typically needs to be at a certain warmer temperature in order for the seeds to sprout. Because the same way with, needing enough water and enough moisture, they need the warmth as well. So you want to make sure, if you're starting your seedlings inside, that they're in a good, warm, sunny spot in a window. Now, if you've got a drafty window, where, if you're standing in front of it and you can feel the cool coming through, you might want to take that into consideration and maybe move them a little bit back from the window, so maybe they're not getting the cool draft, because that'll keep the soil cool. But you just want to make sure that they're in that warm, sunny spot. If you've got them outside, or like outside in a shed or something like that, again, you want to make sure that the sunlight, even though the temperature may still be cool, you want to make sure that sunlight is penetrating the plants enough, there's no drafts, and it's enough to warm them and keep them warm enough for successful sprouting.
Excellent. And we have a question. I have some old seeds. Will they still grow, or do I need to buy new ones? And I would say it would, correct me if I'm wrong, Karen, but that would probably depend on their age and how they've been stored. Is that about right?
Yeah, it would. And so I will say, and that's really up to you, if you want to start with those seeds and just plant multiple, just to increase the potential germination rate. I will say that at the farm, we had seeds donated at one point in time. We stored them in like a little igloo cooler ice chest. So it was insulated, but we kept them in our little portable office kind of / area that we didn't really run the heat often. So because we were usually outside, and by the time, even if it's freezing outside, by the time we got finished working and got back inside, a heater was the last thing. So, they would stay in there over the weekend, and we planted from seeds that were 3 to 4 years old. Now, granted, the germination rate was pretty much cut in half, but they still came up and they still became beautiful, prolific, vegetables that provided plenty of harvest. So again, it depends on how they've been stored. I mean, if the seed packets have gotten wet, or if they've been, in a hot, shed and maybe dried out over the last couple of years, you might have less success. So it's really up to you. I would try it. I mean, I definitely wouldn't toss the seeds. I would definitely try them and maybe have a backup pack on hand if you're really wanting to make sure you get those tomatoes or, whatever seed it is. Maybe go ahead and buy, a pack, or go ahead and try for the next couple of weeks and see what success you get. You may not even need to go out and get any more.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I mean, don't throw them away just yet. So okay, we know that our seeds like, moist soil, and they like sunny, warm spots. So, sometimes they're just not coming up like, the seed packet says they should, or we're just a little worried about, what's going on. I do not have the green thumb in our family. So I'm always like, I plant them and never expect anything to come up. So let's do some troubleshooting. Can you tell us a little bit about some troubleshooting?
Yeah, so I think we all, when we're planting seeds, we get really anxious about, when they're going to come up. We're checking them every day. Why don't I see a sprout yet? And, why aren't they growing? And again, just like the seed packet that we had earlier up, just for reference on the, the directions on the back, there's that day to germinate window. And if you didn't notice, it was very broad. It was 7 days to 21 days. Okay, so I would even, just in my own experience, I would even go to say that could be anywhere from 3 to 5 days to 21 to 30 days. It really just depends. And so why aren't your seeds growing? Well, there's several reasons that, and we've kind of touched on these a little bit, but definitely worth reiterating. So don't worry too much if they're not, following the timeline on the packet. Like I just said, that 7 to 21 days, in my experience, can be 3 to 5 to 21 to 30. So kind of give yourself, a plus or minus on the front end and the back end of that time frame. Again, is your soil too dry? If your soil has dried out, you may have already had a sprout, and then no different than when you've got a full-grown plant and it dries out, it dies. Your seed could have dried out and died. So again, making sure that you're on top of that process of making sure that they've got enough water until at least you see that seedling come up, and then you can continue to take care of them, the way you're supposed to. But a lot of times, if you look over and say, well, my seeds haven't come up and it's been, 3 weeks. If your pot looks like the pot in the graphic that was too dry, then probably what happened is, probably what happened is that seed dried out and isn't going to germinate now. And so again, too cold. Make sure they're in that nice cozy space, because in front of that warm window, away from any cool drafts, making sure that they've got proper heat from sunlight, or just even if it's a warmer place in your house, maybe you have a sunroom or something like that, that the seeds are warm enough to where, moist enough and warm enough to actually germinate. And it always can still be germination issues. So if you're using older seeds, or if you've bought, like Dorothy, the $4 which I have done that plenty of times. But it's very disappointing when you buy the $4 wildflower mix and you just dump the whole thing in your flower and nothing comes up. And you're like, I think I put out about 500 seeds.
Yeah.
Why haven't they come up?
Right.
But yeah, it could also be germination issues. So just kind of how we've talked, as long as they're, kept moist, warm spot, you're using good high quality seeds that have not expired, you typically can avoid that panic of it's been 3 weeks and my seeds aren't up.
Right.
But again, I say, and we've got another comment.
Yep.
Let's see, storing. Yeah.
Yeah. Store leftover seeds in freezer in a Ziploc bag, and germination will be good.
Yep. So yeah, and again, back to using seeds that are old from last year. Definitely, I wouldn't throw them out. I would definitely try, but more times than not, your germination level has dropped, and so you may not get the success that you're hoping for. And even, let's see, we've got another comment. My seeds have expired. Again, I use seeds at the farm that were 3 to 4 years old. They were stored in an ice chest, a little igloo ice chest. They weren't in a super warm area, but I think they were insulated enough in the ice chest that the cold didn't affect them as much. And we still had success with them. Now, granted, not every seed came up, but I'd say at least 50% or more did. And, if you've got old seeds and it's a pack of tomato seeds and there's 20 seeds in there, but you're just wanting a couple of tomato plants, go ahead and plant them all. More than likely, you're going to have a couple of plants come up.
Right. Perfect. Okay. So we have done our troubleshooting, and now we have got some little tiny seedlings coming up. Yay. We're so excited. So this is always one that kind of confounds me, is when are they ready to put in the ground? So let's talk about that.
Okay. So we've got a couple of graphics here that just kind of shows you the life cycle of your seed. Got a couple of titles here of what their scientific names are. And so this is kind of the process of the seed. your first two set of leaves that come out on the plant, and I don't know if I've tried to make sure I'm pronouncing this correctly. I have asked Siri, and I have asked, and so I've even looked up the phonetics of it because I'm not necessarily a scientist. So, but I think it's cotyledon.
Sounds good to me.
It sounds good to me. I may be pronouncing it incorrectly, but there it is right there for you. So, so this first set of leaves are not your true leaves. So when those first set come out, they're definitely not ready to plant yet. You want, and there's the graphic on the right, and I believe this is a tomato plant. It looks like one to me. That's why I chose that graphic, because I know that's one of the things that everybody's planting right now or getting ready to plant is their tomatoes. But you see the difference in the leaves. So that bottom set of leaves, that's that first set of leaves that are not true leaves. Your true leaves are the next sets that start to come out above that. So you can see one good little set, and then you can see coming from the middle a second set. You want to wait until you at least have two true sets of leaves. So not counting that little bottom set that looks totally different.
They do. They look a lot smoother. So it's in some plants, I guess it's easy to tell. So that's good.
Yeah, in most plants, it is pretty easy to tell. And so you want to wait till at least you have two true sets of leaves. Now, this is going to be a transplant that's probably 3 to 5 inches tall, and so you may feel like it's too small to bother with at the moment, that it needs to grow more. And you certainly can let it continue to grow and produce, multiple sets of leaves. But as long as you're gentle and, try not to disturb the roots of the plant, basically probably pulling it from the bottom to transplant it. Once you have two true sets of leaves, they pretty much are old enough to go into the garden.
Perfect. And then you were just talking about, watching the roots and everything. And so I switched to this slide because these are the tips for the transplanting success. So tell us about these.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that's a tomato too. And as you can see, it's got multiple sets of leaves. And actually my tomato transplants, and I should have brought one in here to show you. My tomato transplants have about 5 sets of new leaves, but the bottom leaves are still on there. The cotyledons, they're still on there. They've not fallen off or anything like that. And they're about that size. But you want to make sure that your soil is ready by loosening the soil. I would not recommend tilling because there's a lot of good, if you have a huge garden. Now, maybe this may be the only way to do it, but you want to loosen your soil without over processing it, so to speak, because there's a lot of good bacterias and components of the soil that you don't want to necessarily, crush or, disturb too much. So just making sure just digging around with a rake or a shovel or a hand spade, get the soil loosened up, because this is going to help the roots be able to spread and establish themselves. Before you plant in your site, you want to water very thoroughly. So you want to make sure you've watered enough where it is soaked down and you've got moist soil down, several inches. That way, when you water your transplants, it's going to saturate easier. So if, the top of your soil is wet and then the bottom is dry when you put your transplant in, when you water, that water is just kind of, seep off the edges and not really soak in really good. So water your pot or your garden space thoroughly and get it good and wet for when you're getting ready to plant your plant. So get your hole ready. Once you've done that, make it wide and deep enough to kind of set your plant perfectly down in the hole. You want to remove any dead leaves because even though they may look dead, they still continue to suck nutrients from the plant. for the most part, taking away from the rest of the plant that's trying to thrive. You want to do your best to not disturb the root ball. So if you are pulling out of a transplant pot, if you gently squeeze the bottom of the pot and gently pull the transplant, and they're more resilient and tougher than you think. But squeezing the bottom of the pot, you can typically kind of loosen it enough just to kind of pull the whole thing out. Don't shake off the dirt before planting. Just basically you want to leave it as much intact as possible. Now, a side note, and I should have added this, and I apologize for that, but a side note to that is, and I actually planted some flowers this weekend that they had become root bound. And so root bound, basically, when you pull that plant out of the pot, it's nothing but a big ball of roots. There's no dirt, there's no anything. It's a compact, hard ball of roots. You can, with your hands, slightly kind of loosen that up a little bit. And so, yes, you're disturbing the root, but it's become so compact, it needs a little bit of disturbing to kind of get it loosened up and ready to, you know, spread its wings or its roots, so to speak. So, you know, if it's root bound and super compact and hard, you can disturb it some and it's not going to hurt it. It's not going to hurt it at all. But if you're not, you've just got roots and dirt just kind of hanging, just good to go. Don't worry about loosening it. Just go ahead and stick it in the ground. So once you put it in your hole, you want to plant deep enough to where you're right below, a couple of inches below that I'd say last set of leaves before the ground, but they're actually the first sets of leaves as the plant's growing. But you don't want to plant up above your leaves. You want to be right below where those leaves start. So you just plop it in the hole, put your dirt around it. And then one thing you need to do is you want to secure the plant. So just slightly and lightly just push down around the plant, around, you know, just around the edges, and just kind of push it down into the soil just to kind of get it tight in the soil. Then you're going to water very well at the base of the plant. You don't want to flood it too much. That was the point of watering in the very beginning. So when you do water, that water is going to soak down to the roots where it needs to be. So you're going to water well at the base of the plant. You don't want to flood it because then you're going to cause the plant to, and I've done this before, you know, you think you need to water it, and all of a sudden the plant falls over because I've flooded it. And you'll kind of, you know, you can kind of eye it. I mean, you'll be able to tell whether you're an expert or a newbie. You'll be able to tell when it's, you know, too much or not enough. And then continue to water your plant regularly, just like our seedlings. We don't want to let them dry out because they are establishing themselves in their new home, and they need to continue to get plenty of water so they can continue to grow well.
Excellent. Okay, so we've transplanted them, and all of a sudden they're looking a little sickly, and so we might be encountering transplant shock.
Yeah, transplant shock. And a lot of people think once they've planted, they put these healthy, beautiful transplant seedlings in the ground, and then all of a sudden they look like this the next day. This is transplant shock. It is totally normal. Continue to care for them the way you normally would. Don't think that they're, you know, unless they're completely dried out, just continue to care for them like you normally would. And within a day or two, they typically perk right back up.
Excellent. And we have a quick question. If I realize I overwatered when I plant it, can I pull it back out and start again?
So I would actually not pull it back out. I would just, you know, quite honestly, if you've overwatered and all of a sudden your plant's wobbly because, you know, there's too much water in the soil and it's no longer kind of secure, you know, you can always come back and add a little bit more soil, kind of establish it tight back into the ground, because the water, of course, is going to, you know, eventually seep out, and, you know, it's going to dry out a little bit. So if you've overwatered when you transplant it in and you're your plant's wobbling because there's not, you've
it's kind of floating around. Yeah.
It's floating around. Just give it a minute, add a little bit more soil, and kind of re-secure it back in its spot. I would not pull it back out though, because then that's disturbing the roots again.
Yeah.
Just increasing the chance for it not to prosper.
Yeah, but I would assume adding that extra soil absorbs more of that water. So
yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right, and speaking of soil-like stuff, we're going to be talking about mulch next. Tell us about some mulch.
Yes. So mulch. This is positive and beneficial for so many reasons. And you can use straw, leaves, if you are composting and you've got some good kind of black dirt that still has some of your straw and things like that in it. Some people use hay. Pine straw can be a little acidic, so it could possibly change the pH of your soil. So I usually don't go with pine straw in a vegetable garden. Now for flowers, it doesn't seem, I've never had an issue because we've always mulched like flower beds and things with pine straw. But really, quite honestly, and right now, all the leaves are falling and we're constantly raking leaves. Leaves are ideal. And so you just want to mulch around your plants. Just pile up around them, and you can continue to do this throughout the year. Because one of the good things about this is, especially when you're using leaves or after you've cut the grass, if you use those grass clippings, they keep the plants warm. So that's good for those that are kind of in the northern area where, it stays cooler a little bit longer. It helps secure in that heat. It is a weed deterrent. Now, granted, weeds are relentless. So I'm not saying if you mulch around your tomato plants with a good thick, layer of leaves that there's not going to be weeds that pop up, because there's going to be, but you're reducing that. And then it is just a natural, it will break down, it's composting. If you've got your leaves and your grass clippings and things like that, it's going to break down over time and add nutrients back into the soil. So it's keeping your plants warm. It's reducing weed growth. And I say reducing, it's not eliminating, because I don't know that there's any possible way non-chemically, which we do not encourage, to eliminate weeds. And it's adding nutrients back to it. So I always encourage mulching from the point you put in those tiny transplants and to continue on throughout the growth of your plant.
Awesome. And you had mentioned earlier too about composting.
Yes. So we talked about this on another episode of composting. And so saving our veggie scraps, our coffee grounds, our eggshells. Some of you may have a compost bin or a bucket where you're doing this to create nutrient-rich soil. But you can also do what we love to do, is a compost tea. So if you've got a big handful of veggie scraps and you've saved them over the course of a week, and your coffee grounds and your eggshells, you can take them, put them in a bucket, fill it with water, let it sit for 3 to 5 days. All those nutrients are going to come out of those scraps and basically make a tea. And then you just drain that water off without, the scraps or, and into a watering can, or you can just, if you've got a screen or whatever your method is, and then just take that compost tea that you've made from your scraps and directly water your garden with it. So you're watering, and you're giving needed nutrients back to the plants. And you can do this weekly because, it's organic and it's not going to hurt.
Awesome. I am typing in these instructions for compost tea in our comments right now, folks. So give me just a second. Water for your garden. Okay, there we go. Awesome. I love the idea of compost tea because that seems like it seems so fancy and yet so easy. So
yeah, talk about, economical way to water and give your garden the added nutrients by using scraps that you already have.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that's been so great in this series, and learning so much from you, Tarrant, is that you've done such a great job in telling us some really easy, economical ways to do things with really just stuff that we have around the house. With the planting seeds in the eggshells, empty eggshells, and then you can just transfer the eggshells directly into the soil, and using compost and using grass clippings as mulch. I think these are all great ideas. So I think it's wonderful to know that we can do all of this at home and really inexpensively. So thank you for all of this information. So I think the next slide is really probably the most important once we've got everything in and mulched and composted, is to keep an eye on it.
Yeah, so you want to taking a daily walk in your garden or checking on your plants on a day-to-day basis not only is great for you because you're outdoors, you're in the sunshine, you're in the fresh air. It's always therapeutic and relaxing to walk through your garden or to be outside looking at your plants. But it also allows you to stay on top of things like weeds because from experience and just from having to maintain a larger space with Victory Teaching Farm, if you don't stay on top of those weeds, before you know it, they are on top of you. So it's very important, especially in the middle of the summer, weeds grow like crazy. And not that they're necessarily a nuisance or a bad thing. I mean, we would let weeds kind of grow in around our plants, and as long as they're not choking out the plants, they don't always necessarily pose such a negative to your vegetables, but they can become just a nuisance, and they can eventually crowd out the plants that you're growing. So just staying on top of them, on the daily basis, you could spend 5 minutes weeding your garden, as opposed to if you wait and then all of a sudden midsummer you're being overtaken by weeds. It almost feels like an unsuccessful process to even start. Pest is another thing. Walking on the day-to-day or looking day-to-day, you can quickly identify if you've got a pest issue, particularly with our tomatoes. Hornworms are a huge problem, and you can walk out one day and you've got this big, beautiful, lush, tomato full of leaves and full of, fruit, and you come out, the next day or the day after, and half the plant's gone. These little worms have very, very hearty appetites, and they eat all day long. So, excuse me. So doing a daily watch on your garden will help you identify those things. And honestly, with the worms, an easy way to spot those, for one, if you see that, one of the, I'm a loss for words, one of your plants, one stem's the word I'm looking for. One stem is like completely eaten of leaves. You can kind of look and try to follow where maybe, it had, the worm had moved. Another thing is to look around the bottom of the plant, and you'll see its waste. And you can kind of from there start looking up the plant to see, okay, well, it's on the right side. I see his waist. And so, and they're hard to spot though, because they camouflage right in, but, really, as opposed to using poisons, and some people may be squeamish with this. If you're squeamish and just picking it off, with your hand, you can take a stick or something. I would definitely remove them and move them somewhere else to be,
far away.
far away. And so I definitely get them out and away from the garden, whatever method you're comfortable with. And then you can also quickly notice any problems arising. If they're dried out, if the leaves are turning yellow, And this is going to ensure that, we'll be able to harvest at the peak of time, wonderful, beautiful, healthy plants. And let's see, I think we had Barb.
We do. Barb was asking, how do I get rid of the worms? And you did say pick them off as opposed to using pesticides and such. Is that the best way to do it?
So if you're on a daily basis, you can usually catch them before they overtake your plant. And so that's kind of what we do, and what I do at home. Actually, my husband picks off the worms because I'm a little squeamish with that. But I have, I will if I have to. I'd rather get over that as opposed to losing my tomato plant or my pepper plant. But yeah, you can pick them off, which that's what I would suggest. And if you're checking on your garden regularly, you're going to catch them. There are organic products on the market. If you feel more comfortable using that. There are some products that you can utilize. And, planting things in your garden that deter herbs are a big deterrent to a lot of pests, because of the pungent smell that they give off. And so they, a lot of times, deter. Also, as far as companion planting plants that are pollinator plants, because they're going to bring in your bees. They're going to bring in certain, wasps. They're going to bring in, your pollinators, like your butterflies and, things like that. But some of our bees and our wasps that we can attract to our garden feast on a lot of these pests. So
excellent.
Adding some of those things to your garden, but most off, looking at them daily.
Great idea. And Anne's asking, how do you keep deer out of your garden? And that's a good question, Anne. My dad, who has a very large garden, tends to have this problem a lot. So he has a fence around it, and that helps some. But do you have any other tips, Tara, to keep deer out of the garden? Or
I mean, really, quite honestly, the best way you're going to be able to do that, the same with rabbits and things like that, is to fence in the area. Yeah. You can put out, I think we had a episode a couple of weeks ago where somebody said that they put rubber snakes in their garden.
Yeah.
And that helped them. I think, what was it they were keeping out?
I think it was squirrels. But they had to move them around because the squirrels were getting smart to it. So they had to keep moving the snakes around. Yeah.
Right. So definitely a fence is going to be your best method to do that. But you could try the snakes. I think there's products on the market too that are deterrents for things like that you can sprinkle around your garden that are kind of non-toxic. But yeah, as far as deer, a fence is probably going to be your best bet.
Right.
With anything, I mean, you can purchase. You don't have to have a fancy, fence. You can buy pre-made fencing at some of your local garden centers that you can just, put right into the ground.
Right. So excellent. Okay. And so now we're ready to harvest. So tell us some harvesting tips.
Yes. So bigger isn't always better. Now, depending on, your plants, like peppers and tomatoes, you want a big, huge, pepper and a big fat, ready to slice up, tomato. You have to be careful though, as they get larger. A lot of times your tomatoes can split, things like that, just because they've just gotten too big for what they, what their typical size is. So bigger isn't always better. Specifically, and this is one of our other big summertime crops, is okra. And so there are varieties of okra that are, good to grow large, but typically with the okra, and this is another reason to take a daily walk in your garden, especially once it's harvest time, especially if you have okra, is because you essentially have to pick okra every other day. Can come out one day. I mean, you literally can see it growing before your eyes, it feels like. But once once okra gets to be the size of about your finger, you need to pick it. Because the bigger it gets, the woodier the inside of it gets. So the less tender and the less edible it is. So bigger isn't always better. I think we all kind of know, if you're a big tomato eater or a pepper eater, we kind of know the average size of what, those particular vegetables look like, for when we buy them in the grocery store. And so just being able to kind of eye it and see, okay, it's turned red or it's turned green, it's big enough. It looks like it's big enough to slice for me. You're good to go. You want to avoid wet weather when you harvest. If it's been raining a lot, this just increases the chance for disease and things like that to affect your plants, because you're creating kind of an entry point to the main plant when you're cutting off at a stem or you're picking the fruit. You're kind of creating an entry point. So you really want to avoid harvesting in wet weather. And then you do want to harvest often, again, like I said, with especially with okra, because they'll get to the point to where they'll be too big to even be edible. And then harvesting often allows the plant to refocus its nutrients on those fruits or vegetables that aren't quite ready yet. So definitely you want to make sure that you're harvesting when ready, so the plant can continue to support additional fruiting. And then you want to use proper tools. A sharp knife, because you want to make a good clean cut. Same with pruning shears, they do the same thing, because making that good clean cut is again going to eliminate damage to the plant and eliminate opportunity for disease and things like that to have a way to get in.
Excellent. Okay, so we have gone from seed to transplant to plant to harvesting, and now we're going to finish up with talking about the plate. So what are some of your favorite dishes from the garden, Terrence?
Yeah, so I love pretty much anything. It really isn't a vegetable that I do not like. So I love pretty much all of it. But of course, I love tomatoes. I mean, that's, everybody has one of those favorite smells, things that they just love the smell of. Mine is tomato plants. I love to brush my hands across, the plants, which actually is very good for them.
Oh.
To kind of just give them a little brush. It really is a good thing for the plants. But I love tomatoes because they're versatile. You can put them in a salad. You can, fry them. You can, make a sandwich out of them. You can make your own spaghetti sauce. I mean, there's so many things you can do. Eat them just fresh on a plate with salt and pepper. And the same with cucumbers. They're so any of those things that, you can throw in a salad real quick and just have something fresh out of the garden. I actually made these for dinner last night, and it's stuffed bell peppers.
Yes.
Those are one of my absolute favorites. So, and you can stuff them with anything. It's funny. When we decide what we're going to have for the weekend, my husband's favorite thing is to YouTube videos of different recipes. And so we were having stuffed bell peppers, but he found a recipe where, and it was out of New Orleans, my hometown. They were doing stuffed peppers, but as opposed with ground beef or ground turkey or, a vegan type example of beef or turkey, they were using seafood.
Oh, yes.
Crab and shrimp. Oh, they looked delicious. So, but yeah, and bell peppers, again, you can saute them in a stir fry. You can stuff them. You can put them in a salad. There's just so many, so many ways to use them.
Yeah.
Eat them raw with a little dip or something like that.
Yes. One of my favorite things, and it's so simple to do, is I love just plain old roasted veggies. Just with tonight, we're going to have that. And I'm taking zucchini and yellow squash and some fingerling potatoes, an onion, a red bell pepper. I like to do it as colorful as possible. red bell pepper, and some carrots. And I'm just chopping everything up and putting a little olive oil over it and some sea salt. And I just throw that, just throw it on a big baking sheet and throw it in the oven on pretty high temp for about like 450. And I do it for about 15 to 30 minutes. I kind of shuffle them up in between and just kind of keep an eye on them. And that's like the best thing in the world for me. Like, I just love that.
Yes, I love that too. And I'm glad you mentioned that. And so outside of fried okra,
yes,
I love fried okra, but outside of that, I love to roast vegetables. And you're right. It is such an easy, simple, so nutritious, eating the rainbow meal. And actually, if we're trying to, and you can do that with summer vegetables, like you mentioned, which is what you're doing. But you can also do that if you've had a winter garden and you've got turnips, rutabagas, and Brussels sprouts, and things like that, including potatoes and sweet potatoes. You can do the same with those. And that's one of my favorites. And I do it exactly like you do. I just chop everything up, put it all on the same pan, drizzle a little olive oil to give that moisture, a little bit of salt, and you're good to go.
And I put, when I take it out, and I sprinkle a little bit of shredded Parmesan cheese on it, and my kids will eat it. Will actually eat it. So the cheese is the key for them for some reason, though. It's magical. But
I think that's most kids. You put cheese on it, and
absolutely. And like you said, the fried okra, another one of my favorites. I could eat it all day long, every day. So, well, this has been awesome. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to mention, we actually had a workshop at the farm last year when we were able to be in person, and I invited one of our partner chefs in, and we harvested okra from the garden, and he created, he had peanuts that he had blended up in the blender to kind of make a peanut dust. And I think he added salt and pepper and maybe some cayenne just to add some kick to it. And so he made like this peanut dust. Now, granted, if you have allergies, this wouldn't be an option for you. But he made like this peanut dust kind of breading. And he breaded the okra with that as opposed to typical flour or breadcrumbs or something like that, and put a healthy twist on fried okra. And he sauteed it in the pan. He didn't deep fry it. It was absolutely delicious. And I miss those days because everybody went home with a bag of the fresh okra from the farm, and it was great. So, a lot of people were like, well, I don't really, like to fry. It's, not healthy. And there are healthy alternatives to frying things.
Absolutely. And we will get there again. We will get there to in person again, I promise. And so, Taryn, thank you so much. And what I'm really excited about is I saw a tracking order that's headed to your house, which will, it's out for delivery now. So what we're hoping for, folks, is to get Taryn out in her garden outside to show you stuff. And so we had to get some more technological equipment to do that, which is on its way to her house. So we're hoping that we can get that set up for you guys real soon, so y'all can see stuff in real time and get Taryn out in the sun and showing us all the fun, great stuff. So we're really excited about that.
On and hands dirty.
Yes.
Back in the dirt.
Absolutely. Getting back in the dirt. So, folks, thanks so much for joining us. Next time, we are going to be talking about, this was another one that was asked from some of our viewers, was about starting community gardens. How do they start a garden in their community? And so we're going to be talking about that. And we are going to be talking about, what Tarrant has done, what some other places has done, and what, what some best practices are for starting a garden in your community. So I'm really excited about that. So Tarrant, as always, thank you so much. It's always so fun to do these with you. And I cannot wait to get outside.
Me too.
All right, folks, well, stay tuned for the next few minutes. We're going to show our video of all of our fun events coming up. And until then, we will see you soon on what's going on.
Bye.